it's recursive. It's fractal.
Right. It's
What was it? What was
okay,
that?
cool. I see us on the Lubbock Compact Facebook page. Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for sitting through that few minutes of us trying to get this figured out. Um, as you all who follow the show know, we've been having these technical difficulties with our connection with our page. Super weird. So today we're live from my personal profile page, sharing it over to the Lubbock Compact page, but an important show. Here today, of course, I am your host, Adam Hernandez, here with my co-host, Josh Shankles, and we have Morgan Kirkpatrick with us here today, who is a candidate for State Board of Education for District 15, which is the district we're in right now if you're in Lubbock or Lubbock County. And then she can explain all of the other counties that are in District 15 here in just a second. We're going to get into all of the things and discuss it all right here on Lubbock Compact Live. So thank you for tuning in. Josh, let's get it going.
Yeah, well, Morgan, thanks for coming on the show today and joining us and being willing to talk about this. Before we get into anything else, I want to give a disclaimer up front. Folks know that Lubbock Compact is a 501c3 organization. We're a public nonprofit. And so what we don't do is any recommending candidates for election or recommending anybody get voted against for election. But we have periodically had candidates on the show. We like to bring people forward when they have something to share with our audience. And so we wanted Morgan to come on and talk about the State Board of Education. We did extend an invitation to her opponent, Aaron Kinsey, and that invitation remains open, but he has so far declined on that. So that disclaimer being up front, Morgan, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on. Why don't you spend a moment introducing yourself to our audience and telling us a little bit about your background and kind of what made you want to run for State Board of Education?
So thank y'all for having me on as a guest. It's a little different wearing a different hat. I was born and raised in Lubbock and am a of successful public schools. I graduated from LCU, Lubbock Christian University, and started teaching at age 22. And so I taught middle school here in Lubbock ISD for 14 years. I started at Cavazos and taught there for 8 years. And then I taught at Hutch for the next 6 years. And I thought that was going to be my forever career. I honestly never envisioned myself anything else. I was the nerdy kid who was always the teacher when we played school as kids. And so I never questioned that. I wanted to be a teacher from 4th grade on. And unfortunately, 2 years ago, I made the most difficult decision of my life and left teaching in May of 2022. While I miss teaching, I miss the interactions with students and talking about books and that sort of thing. It was the best decision for both me and for my students because I didn't want to be that teacher who should have left. And I have a passion for public education and want to be a voice for Texas students and teachers. And so when I saw that there was not anybody running against the current seat holder, I decided I wanted to throw my hat in the ring and attempt to do that.
What was your subject area, Morgan?
I taught 7th grade. Well, I've always taught middle school. My degree is interdisciplinary studies 4 through 8 generalist, and I don't think that exists anymore. I think it's either K through 6 or 6 through 12. But middle school was my favorite time in school. I don't know why. It's one of the hardest times as a kid, but no, I taught 7th grade reading and English for the most part. When I first started teaching, I taught 6th, 7th, and 8th. I taught 6th grade reading, and then 7th and 8th grade combined tax classes back when we still had the tax test.
And fun fact for our audience, Morgan actually was one of my child's teachers. So she was my youngest daughter's teacher. So at Hutch. Fun
Yep, had
fact.
harmony in my first year of teaching at Hutch.
I was just trying to do some calculus in my own head because I student taught at Coronado, and then but I worked as a substitute. I graduated at a weird time, so I worked as a substitute in LISD for like a semester until I started my first teaching job. And I was like, I wonder if I ever subbed Morgan's class at Hutch.
Oh wow, that would
uh
have been crazy.
yeah, well, um Morgan, you're running for State Board of Education. Maybe you'd like to tell the audience what exactly this board does, what it supervises, how it's constituted. Set the stage for us.
So I had to learn all of this as after I'd already committed to run for office, because as a teacher, the State Board of Education was not on my radar at all. So you have your local school boards, and then the State Board of Education has a list of responsibilities. And the top two, in my opinion, include curriculum instruction, setting those standards for the curriculum, and then instructional materials. They approve those, which then local school boards can choose from. And so it's a 15-member board. There are 15 districts. Each of the districts, I think, have around 2 million people or constituents. And so the District 15 covers the entire Panhandle, plus some of the plains and the Permian Basin. So it's all the way from the top of the Panhandle to Midland, Odessa, over to San Angelo and Brady, up to Abilene and Wichita Falls. And so a lot of the things that I learned, I gleaned from Teaching Texas is a podcast that I would highly recommend everybody check out, especially because public education is important, and the State Board of Education is making decisions that influence the daily lives of our students and our teachers specifically, because those curriculum standards are the things that the teachers have to teach and students are required to learn before they graduate. And so to me, that is monumental. And let's see, just trying to think of your question, and did I cover it all? Watching the movie, the 2012 documentary, The Revolutionaries, was quite insightful. I don't know if either of you saw the clip that I shared on TikTok, but I was watching it on my phone and screen recorded several pieces because the meetings are streamed live. The SBOE only meets like 5 times a year for 3 or 4 days at a time. And so I've also been watching those throughout this past 9 months. And in the movie The Revisionaries, there's a scene where they are talking about Don McElroy was the board chair for quite a while. He was a dentist. And he made the recommendation that they remove hip hop from the TEKS, the history TEKS, back in 2012, or I think it might have been 2010. And it was funny because he got some pushback from other members saying, do you even know what hip hop is? And, he said it should be replaced with country and Western music. And one of the other members he was like, okay, I'm going to offer an amendment and say, let's leave hip hop, but we can add country Western music. And so those are the minute details that these members can change, that are in black and white for the next 10 years, because that's kind of the schedule of reviewing those standards.
Yeah, and this is something that I've started to think about a lot more since I've been involved, is when you look at how our public education system works here in Texas, sort of everything comes from the top. So you have the Texas Education Agency, and then it like goes down from there, right? And they, like you said, only meet every 10 years. So like whatever they do in those meetings and whatever the final vote is, like we had to live with that for 10 years. And something a lot of people don't know, I didn't know until I started looking more into public education, is what the curriculums that get approved here in Texas influence a big part of the country. The reason why is because Texas is a huge state. They sell a lot of textbooks. And so the textbook companies pay close attention to what's happening in Texas. And those books then, once the Texas curriculum is set, that heavily influences those books. Those books then get sold all over the place. And so it really is a really important part of this whole process, right? And you talked about these moments of these sort of kind of back and forths, and so I do kind of want to talk about the point that these are partisan seats. And the reason why that's important to me is in our current climate, everything is very politicized, right? And schools have been up there on the top of the list of this. And so maybe we can talk about, because I'm aware of the indigenous studies sort of situation that is sort of ongoing with the State Board of Education. And I know that your opponent, Kinsey, is the chair of the State Board of Education now, appointed there by the governor. So can you sort of, because I think it's good to go through this because it's a real life example of sort of how this whole thing comes together with the partisan side of it, and sort of the rhetoric that sort of leads to these decisions, and then the actual decisions that are made that hold up things from getting on the curriculum. So I guess could you just sort of from the beginning of that situation sort of walk everybody through why did this idea come about, about the Hispanic studies, Black studies, and then the whole sort of origin story of this, and then walk everybody through the processes happening now, so that people can kind of understand how this process works.
For sure. I'm going to come right back to that, but I wanted to touch back on what you were saying about the publishing companies. And so that's a lot of what the Teaching Texas podcast goes over. And it starts back in the 50s and 60s with a couple who goes through their son's textbook line by line. And so it's fascinating to see how that morphed into what we have today. But they, there was a 2018 New York Times report of sorts that it's a really cool kind of interactive graphic that compares a California textbook and the Texas textbook. And so as you scroll through, you see what's in the California textbook, and then you keep scrolling and it shows you what was changed or removed or added in Texas. So just a couple of points on that for people who are interested and want to go find more. But with the, I came across a group called the Ethnic Studies Network of Texas, and I know they were on the show a couple of weeks ago. And so I learned that, so Kinsey was appointed as the board chair back in December of 23. He was about a year into his first term. He was elected in 2022. And so at the November meeting in 23, Kevin Ellis, I believe, was the chair at the time. And he said that the Native American Indigenous Studies course would be put on the agenda for the January meeting to have its first reading, which is where the board is able to ask questions and get clarification on things that they're unsure about. So this course came from a 2018 mandate of sorts that called for ethnic studies. And so Mexican American Studies was approved in 2018. African American Studies was approved in 2020. And these are elective social studies courses. And so they start out as an innovative course, which is just kind of the first level of approval, the approval process, so to speak. And so the next thing on the list was the Native American Indigenous Studies, and there's also an Asian American Studies. So this mandate called for all four of those ethnic studies courses. And so come January, it was removed from the agenda and indefinitely. Why wasn't said. Really, if it was going to be in the future, or put back on in the future. And so one of the most telling things, I think, is one of the charts that Orlando shared on y'all's show, that once it is approved by the State Board of Education, so many more districts and so many more hundreds of kids, of students, are able to take these courses, and there's nothing but an increase. And so the fact that this was removed, it is an innovative course now, and it's being it was piloted. The pilot program began in Grand Prairie ISD, and I think there are a few other high schools who are offering it as an innovative course. But I signed on a petition back in January to get it added to the April agenda, and that didn't happen. We tried it again for the June agenda. So it doesn't look like it's going to happen this year. So those are the kinds of decisions that are going to have long-term impacts on our students and teachers. And so as a teacher, I had no idea about the Mexican American and African American studies courses. And so those are in the course catalog for Lubbock ISD. But they have to have a minimum of, I think, 15 students to make a class. And so that's never happened. Therefore, it's never been offered as a class beyond the course catalog. Does that
Josh,
kind of...
any thoughts on this? Great explanation.
Yeah, and I'm making a leap here, but this, would you say that this is like driven from a perspective that is sort of like partisan and kind of caught up in the zeitgeist of what, kind of the battlefield that is public education, or is it driven from a sort of factual place that is like about the course not being fully developed, or this isn't relevant information for people?
So unfortunately, I think you are spot on. It is part of this partisan movement to trying to choose my words, but for lack of a better word, whitewash history. And so kind of censoring what students are learning about history. And, specifically in our area, I didn't learn some of the things about the Lipan Apache people until I read a magical realism book with my 7th graders in, I want to say 2021. And so as an adult, I am learning these things. And so it just seems like common sense that our students should have access to it. And so I will point out that, I was talking about the Revisionaries documentary was released in 2012. So I'm pretty sure it was the 2010 review of the social studies TEKS was the last time that our social studies TEKS have been updated. So 2022, they were up for review again. They have work groups of professors and teachers, people with pedagogical knowledge and understanding, historians, of these, people who are volunteering their time. I'm fairly sure it's a volunteer position. I can't imagine that it's paid. I could be wrong. But they went through the hours upon hours of revising those standards. And in 2022, it was decided we're going to set these aside and wait until 2025. And so that was right after there were 5 fairly a little more extreme conservative leaning people were elected to the board, fortunately.
Right. This kind of transitions us perfectly into some of the questions that I kind of pinned down about this. As a former educator myself, I must say that I'm kind of whipping some of my old dead horses. And I didn't prep Morgan for any of this, but I would like to talk to both of you, especially Morgan, about some of these philosophy sort of things. But I think it strikes at what you were saying about the State Board of Education setting kind of curriculum standards and instructional materials. Have you ever heard of the saber-toothed curriculum, Morgan?
I can't say that I have.
This was a book, a fictional book, but it was education oriented, written, I want to say in like the 70s or something.
Okay.
And real quick plot synopsis, there are a whole bunch of prehistoric human beings, and they are being killed and eaten by saber-toothed tigers.
Oh goodness.
And so they create a school curriculum about how to avoid getting hunted down by saber-toothed tigers, and it's wildly successful. Numbers drop of people killed by saber-toothed tigers, and so they're like, oh man, this works so good, let's do this again and again. And so they do it for years and years and years and years, and suddenly there are no more saber-toothed tigers, yet they're still sitting in classrooms learning about how to avoid being eaten by saber-toothed tigers. And the point that the book was trying to illustrate is kind of how much institutional momentum, or how much momentum institutions can kind of pick up and then suddenly find themselves non-responsive to the reality of our lived world. And so I guess my question would be, how do we avoid that kind of thing in our modern curriculum? What kind of, how could we push back against that kind of thing that happens in all institutions? It's certainly not exclusive to a school board, but it illustrates his point.
That's truly incredible, because the minute you said there were no more saber-toothed tigers and that they're still sitting in class learning about these things, it's spot on. And I had a conversation recently talking about how, public school was first developed, in the industrial age, and, in mostly agrarian societies. And we are still operating in that mindset for the most part. And so,
That's why kids have the summer off.
Exactly. And that's exactly what I wanted to point out, because one of the things that I felt, would make everybody's life easier. I get that it would be a struggle to implement at first, but year-round school with more breaks throughout the year, shorter breaks more often, would benefit everybody, I feel like, but especially, teachers and their workloads and burnout. That was one of the main reasons I left. And so I feel like I don't have the knowledge to say, how we can fix this. Like, what is and I know there's not one magic answer that's going to make everything better, but I think, a lot of if I looked at myself as a teacher from starting in August of 2008 to where I finished in 2022, I became a different person. And I feel like that started with a lot of the middle grade and YA books that I began reading with a new librarian at Cavazos. And she introduced me to the Global Read Aloud, and I took that to Hutch, and we did it every year. And so we weren't reading the same book every year.
Mm.
We switched it up. There was one book that we all loved and we did read, but we changed up the fall book that we read. And so I never taught the same thing the same way every year in a row. And so I might have been similar, but I tweaked it because it depends on the kids you have sitting in front of you. And so that's one of the most frustrating things about the state legislature and that sort of thing is that it's never going to be cookie cutter, and it's never going to go back to the sit and get methodology that our parents and us to some extent experienced as students.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there is no like magic solution, and certainly I don't have the answers to this or anything, but in my time in education, teachers were very innovative, and they're like they're on the ground, and they're very close to the needs and demands of students, and they're often very thoughtful, conscientious sort of people, yet they're very constrained by mandates and different things that have this same, even when they're well-meaning, it has this sort of institutional momentum. It's very hard to change up. And so like I think just like with education itself, the step that precedes doing things is knowing about things, and like just empowering more people into this I guess policy making roles that have more insight on that is like maybe a good start for how we make our public schools and all of our institutions really kind of work better and be more responsive. And so Adam, what you got some thoughts here?
I have a lot of thoughts. I probably shouldn't say them on this program, a lot of them, but I do know that it's going to take, as most things that I talk about, it's going to take more of a holistic approach. That you both sort of have hit on this. There's so many different parts to public education, even just at the state level, right? We talked about the TEA. We're here talking about the State Board of Education, which does another piece, right? And then there's the state legislature, which plays a different role, right? And so the thing I think that I'd like to get across with folks is that it absolutely matters where these elected officials are in terms of public education. And the reason why is exactly this, right? One of the things that I think could probably happen that would help improve things that wouldn't really even cost any extra money necessarily. I mean, it would be, instead of doing this on a 10-year schedule, maybe we shorten that schedule, because as you both talked about, and as going forward, when we're talking about technology and how technology is innovating and evolving very quickly, right? The internet has made things speed up in a way that just wasn't there prior to that. So I think that some of these processes could stand to speed up to try to catch up with some of that and keep up with some of that, I should say. That's one piece of it, right? That's just one decision that could be made. Then you have, from the perspective of the State Board of Education in terms of curriculum. I just saw a comment here from John Gatika, and he says, our demographics have changed across the state and we continue to do the same thing, expecting different results. We've got so many different people from different backgrounds, yet they can't learn about their ancestry and their ancestors' achievements and shortcomings and histories, right? Over the years, right? And it's not to make anybody feel bad, but it's to have that full picture of what the actual history is. And so then there's the whole pushback of, well, we just want to teach what we always taught. Well, unfortunately, got news for a lot of people, a lot of that stuff was incomplete. So when you learned about George Washington, or you learned about how Texas was created, and you learn about all of these different historical things that happen, you're not told the full story. And sometimes, I hate to break it to you, they're just outright inaccurate, right? Some of these things that you're being taught. And so that plays a big role. The last thing I'll say that I think people really need to understand is how funding for public schools work, and how without the state, we would have no public education. And by the way, it's in our Texas state constitution. When they created the state of Texas, they felt it so important to put it in the constitution that the state needed to provide quality public education for everybody. We fall very short on that a lot of times. But how it works is a lot of people think, oh, well, we pay all these taxes and it's supposed to take care of everything the school does. Same way they think about the city, right? We pay our property taxes. The city should just have enough money for everything, right? That's not how it works. In the city's instance, you got property tax and sales tax and all sorts of other things. On the school district side, they get the property tax portion that they take, and there's some some other smaller sources of income that they take, but the state is what makes school districts whole, right? So they pour in whatever the school district cannot make to cover all of their expenses and all the things they need to do. The state pours that into the bucket, if you will, and makes those whole. And so one of the things that we know that we need to do is increase the size of that bucket that school districts get. And that will, and it looks different for every district, right? But what that does is that allows those districts to have not only the money to keep and recruit teachers, but also to provide these different kinds of programming, and connect more students with those. Because you talked about this, Morgan, a lot of students just don't even know these exist. Their parents, their parents don't even know they exist, right? And to sign their kids up for these electives and things like that they might be interested in. And so there's just so many different moving parts to it. But the governor has a lot to do with this, appoints a lot of these positions. The people who are on the State Board of Education have a lot to do with this. They pick the curriculum, right? And I think it concerns me when we're talking about, this is the last thing I'll say. I think it concerns me when, so for instance, your opponent is the chair of this State Board of Education and he has no education experience. I think that that's important for people to know. And I think that, at least for me, in my mind, I think that's problematic, because especially if you're at that high of a level, I would even say that if they were like a school board person, right, that had like no experience in education, right? But we're talking about the state level, like basically the state school board, right? I think that people there should have experience in education. Call me crazy, but yeah, there's so many different moving parts to it. I know I kind of rambled there, so anybody else can jump in.
There's so much. It's such a big puzzle, and like you said, there are so many pieces that so many of us are unaware of. I shared a link in the comments from Texas Public Radio called Golden Pennies. And so that is part of the school finance puzzle with Recapture. I think it's like 4 short episodes, but it's really informative. And so all of that to kind of lead back to the state legislature conversation. I've been working with a group of women who are running for everything from, as there are 3 of us who are running for State Board of Education, all the way to U.S. Congress. And so we're all Texas women, and we all feel like if people focused on public education when choosing their votes, that we could make such a difference. And so I wanted to share one resource is Texans for Public Education. The website is t4pe.org, and they have a rating system, and it is not partisan. They advocate for block voting for public education. And so that's what their rankings are based on. And there are green for public education, red against public education, and white for neutral. And so I would highly recommend that every voter check out that resource, because it feels like public education is the foundation of everything else. If we have a strong public education, then we can only go up from there. And I just don't know how to get that through to people so that that shows in their voting, you know, voting to begin with, but then voting for public education at top of mind.
Yeah, yeah.
Speaking, I think.
Go
Sorry,
ahead,
Josh.
Adam.
Speaking of voting and this aspect of it, and maybe both of y'all can speak to this from your experience as teachers. And I've definitely seen some things, and it's sort of it was very surprising to me and very eye opening to me that, at least from my perspective, anecdotally, a lot of teachers do not vote. Period. So is this something, Josh, that you saw in your career? I know, Morgan, you've seen a little bit of this. Um, can y'all speak to this? Like, what do you think is happening there? Are I don't know. It confuses me a whole lot, but maybe y'all can speak to this.
Go for it, Josh.
Uh, I've been out of this game for a long time. It'd be hard for me to say. I mean, I was a band director and I worked with my colleagues all the time, and we actually talked about this all the time. They were definitely voters, but I guess if I had to guess, it's that teachers are humans and people, and they have the same sort of failings and illogical behavior in their personal life that any other person in the public might. But
I feel like
I wish it weren't so, because uh there's such linchpins in what goes on. Morgan.
so can I ask you, your fellow band music teachers, were they majority male, female, or just a mix?
Oh yeah, no, it was two dudes. Yeah.
Okay, so I feel like that has a lot to do that it's the majority female, female dominated profession, and it's societal. Polite society, we don't discuss religion or politics unless you're, in West Texas, and then you can do one but not the other. So I feel like we have shied away from having those conversations because in the past 2 years since I left teaching, I have met more progressive, like-minded people, not necessarily Democrats, but people who are more open-minded and willing to consider other perspectives. Not to say that that wasn't the case in schools, but I feel like we have to start having those conversations and talking about who we're voting for and what we're voting for and why, uh, to kind of break some of that stigma, because it's not polite. I know that's only a small portion of it, but
yeah. So here's a great comment here, I think, from Skylar. It brings up something that I think would be a good part of this conversation, because Morgan, I've seen at different forums and things you've been asked, what would you do in this position for this issue or that issue, right? And so I think it's important to talk about. I mean, we've kind of already talked about what the State Board of Education sort of controls, which is curriculum, is really sort of the I guess the one that most people would be most concerned with. So setting curriculum and things of that nature. And so that's what the State Board of Education does. I know you've also talked about, even though State Board of Education doesn't control other aspects of public education, you are an advocate for public education. So you could certainly, and you do, I've seen this as a candidate and as a person on State Board of Education, you could be an advocate, right? And use your voice and whatever influence you may have to further those issues, right? And so this comment is, he says, what are you going to do to protect our schools from school shooters and predators? So I just wanted to take a moment to sort of, first of all, let Skylar know State Board of Education really cannot control those things. They mostly deal with curriculum. But I think it's a good moment, Morgan, for you to sort of talk about some of the other things that maybe you advocate for, or so, about this issue in particular, of course, maybe vouchers, anything else you're looking at, so that people can kind of get an understanding of maybe where you sit on some of these issues.
So I made the decision to leave in January of 22, and 2 days before my last day of school, Uvalde happened. And I remember I was standing out at morning duty, watching kids get out of cars, thinking about I think he was in second grade at that time, my nephew, and not understanding how parents, can do that, not knowing whether or not their kid is going to come home safely. Um, and so all I can say on that count is that I do not believe teachers should be armed. Um, I was medicated for depression and anxiety from September of my first year of teaching. And I don't mind sharing that publicly because I think it needs to be talked about, because it is so overwhelming in some situations that I would not want anybody in that frame of mind to be armed. But when you think of how many decisions a teacher has to make in a day, we shouldn't add that to it, because at a public education forum that was put on by Texas Tech Public Media and the League of Women Voters and American Association of University Women a few weeks ago, Senator Charles Perry made the statement that he talked to a teacher who was across the hall in Uvalde who wished that she had been able to have her concealed carry gun with her. And I just cannot imagine a teacher having to make that decision to shoot a child, a kid, because he was 18. He's still a kid. I can't imagine a teacher being put in that situation. All of that to say, no, I couldn't affect that situation as an SBOE member. But like you said, I would be an advocate against arming teachers, but doing everything that I could to make sure our students and faculty staff are safe.
Yeah.
As far as go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, just to add before you get into the next piece, I think a lot of this has to do with how our gun laws are set up and how other things, from mental health to all sorts of different things, I think affect that situation. Obviously a lot of those things could be affected by our state legislature. So go ahead.
For sure. And so I do feel like it's our responsibility as with anybody with any sort of power. I feel like we do have a responsibility to speak up for the issues that we care about and that are important. And so one of the several reasons that I decided to leave included the I believe it was in the 2021 legislative session when a state legislator started passing around a list of about 850 books that he believed should be removed from libraries. And when I left teaching, I had over 600 books in my classroom library that I either purchased myself or had donated from friends and family, or that I wrote grants for. And in 2020, I actually did a book club, a voluntary book club with the book called Stamped. It was the remix, the YA version, and I can't imagine that happening today. And so all of these book bans and it's censorship, and telling kids that they aren't allowed to read about this, and I refuse to censor my students because I had multiple ages. I taught a book club class, global book study class, where I had 8th graders, and then I also taught 7th grade. So I had kids in my room from age 11 to 14, possibly 15. And so that is such a huge range, when you think about kind of the progression in what you learn about what you're interested in. And I feel like I led every year by telling my students that, what you read is between you and your adults, because I'm going to offer books that might appeal and are age appropriate for the students in front of me. And if that is not something that interests you, or that you know that your family wouldn't want you to read that, then that's a conversation y'all need to have. And so censoring books and history. I just, those are probably my biggest passions, simply because, you know, I've learned so much about myself and the world around me from reading books. And I feel like I would have been a different person had I had access to books like that when I was a kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, responding to this person's sort of comment, it's like, what to do about predators in schools? It's like, a lot of ways that people learn to identify things like that without having to personally go through that experience is in books, in reading. There are books that are about this, that cover this sort of thing, that routinely get, you know, read as in school board meetings as smut, when in fact this is exactly the type of knowledge that somebody might like to have to keep themselves out of a dangerous situation, which they aren't in by reading it. Anyway, go on.
No, I just feel like if kids have a smart computer or a smartphone, a mini computer in their hand, and they choose to pick up a book to read, whether, you know, it's a physical book in their hands or an ebook, audiobook from the library, I feel like they could be making worse decisions. And so the only other thing that I can really think of at the moment is public funds staying in public schools, bare minimum, because
and this is
schools
the
are,
voucher issue.
yes.
Yes.
And so I want people to understand, and another podcast I will recommend is the voucher scam from Mothers for Democracy. It's a four main parts, but then they have bonus episodes. One goes into more background about the Houston situation. One of them goes into detail about this situation in Atlanta, and they're a few years ahead of us. So we have a lot that we could learn from their situation, which is not good. But people, bottom line, people need to understand that vouchers are not for school choice. It's school choice for the school, not for families, because the schools, the private schools, get to choose which students they accept, and they are not required to offer special ed services or dyslexia services or disability services, ADA compliance, as far as, you know, making sure that students have what they need to be successful. And so they don't have to take those students. It's just, I really wish people understood how detrimental it will be, especially to rural schools where their public schools are the heart of the community.
Yeah. And
I got a great public
sorry,
education from Littlefield Public Schools, very rural, and I was well taught there. You know, I'd hate to see that diminish for anybody across the state. Go on.
yeah, and just so everybody out there listening, especially in Lubbock County and some of these rural areas here around Lubbock, I can guarantee you that all of your educators, all of your administrators for your school districts out here are highly against vouchers. As many of you will know, I'm, you know, in a lot of these different conversations. I will be included in more of those conversations as this situation continues to evolve. But the school systems that will be the hardest hit are those that are classified as rural, and regardless of the size of Lubbock at the current moment, we are considered rural, and so that includes Lubbock, that includes anything around here that's smaller than Lubbock. And so as Morgan was talking about, and I just sort of wanted to give a little more context here, when you're talking about public schools have requirements and standards that they have to meet, and that deals with all sorts of things, from children with disabilities all the way to just day-to-day how school works, right? There's lots of different standards in place that keep people safe, that create a safer environment, that you know, really help every student possible to be successful through their school career, right? Private schools do not have those same requirements right now. So if vouchers were to pass and you think that you're going to be able to take your child over to a private school, first of all, the amount of the vouchers that are being talked about, I think it's like 8,000 was like the highest one I heard. That doesn't even cover the tuition of the private school anyway. So this is really going to be going to people who already have their children in private school. So it's essentially a subsidy for those people who already have their children in private school that people in public schools will be helping to pay for. All right. That takes money directly out of public school systems and puts it into private school systems. And as Morgan pointed out, those schools can deny you for any reason. You don't have to be disabled. You don't have to be any, like, for whatever reason. If you walk in there and they don't like how you styled your hair that day, they could not approve you to go to that school. And it's not the same in public school. Public schools have to allow you to go there, right? And so it's just very important to understand why so many people are talking about these voucher things and why it's so important to pay attention to who is for the vouchers and who is not, because I can guarantee you, if this gets passed, regardless, because there's some talk from some of our state senators that they're gonna, if the voucher thing goes forward, they're gonna try to put those guardrails in there. Essentially, they're gonna try to make the private schools hold to those same standards and those same requirements that public schools have. That's not guaranteed to pass in the final bill. So even though there's some of our state senators that are pushing for that, that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to pass. And even if it does, this would absolutely wreck the public school system. And there's much more to that. I don't know if this would be the live stream to do that whole conversation on. I think if you listen to the podcast that Morgan has recommended here, I think that would probably be the best way to go. We can't get into the full story about vouchers. Just know that it's in my mind very detrimental, and in the minds of admins and educators that everywhere across Texas that I've talked to. And this is not a partisan issue on the side of the folks that don't want vouchers. I can tell you that the people who don't want vouchers, it is not partisan. You have people from all across the spectrum who do not want these vouchers. Now, the people who want the vouchers, I will tell you, that is hyperpartisan, and that motivation has been hyperpartisan. And you know, it is what it is. So we are at 7:57. Josh, go ahead. Do you have something here?
Yeah, Morgan, we know you have another date to get onto. We'd love to talk more about all this, but I know you got another thing
we
to do.
could talk for hours and not get to it all.
Yeah. Why don't you tell folks how they can get in touch with your campaign or learn some more, support your work if they're so inclined? Yeah.
So I am obviously on Facebook, and Instagram, Twitter. I still call it Twitter, X, TikTok, Morgan Kirkpatrick for TXSBOE15. My website doesn't have the TX, so it's Morgan Kirkpatrick for SBOE15.com. All of the podcasts that I mentioned are linked there. I have multiple resources that I feel like give insight into not just the race itself, but also to the State Board of Education in general. And so I have a block walk coming up on Sunday. We're knocking doors in Lubbock neighborhoods, and I have a couple of more postcard writing get-togethers, and all of that is on Mobilize. If you go to mobilize.com and look up Lubbock County or search my name, you should be able to find it. But reach out to me, because the email address and phone number that are listed everywhere for my campaign come directly to me. And so it's a real shoestring budget situation, grassroots type of thing. And I'm going to be in San Angelo next Monday. I will be in Denver City on Tuesday, Amarillo on Wednesday, and Abilene on Thursday. And so kind of making the rounds next week to kind of visit some of the other areas, because we've got to get the word out. And so if you have family or friends or colleagues in any of these areas, please, mention my name and just ask people to look at the race and decide for themselves who they feel like has the better experience for the job at hand. So
Yeah, well, thanks for coming on the show and sharing that perspective. I hope this was of value to the viewers. And once again, Mr. Kinsey, the chair and the current seat holder for SBOE 15. Again, we'd welcome having a different perspective on the show. So if you catch this and this is the last word, come on down. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, and real quick, Morgan, we do have some comments down there that you could probably answer if
Okay.
if you didn't have enough time. I mean, enough to do already. If you find some time in your
I
very
will
busy
check them out.
schedule, yeah, you can check those out and answer those questions we didn't get to.
So I just have to say thanks to you guys for all that I've learned from you about community organizing and working with the community. So I couldn't have done this without knowing y'all. So thank you.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you for running and thank you for coming on. And we know you got to go, so we'll let you get on to your meeting. Thanks,
Bye, y'all.
Morgan. All right, bye.